Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Road to 2000. As always, my name is Caleb Denby, and tonight I'm going to be taking you through some of the many immortal chess games that have ever been played. So, I want to start with the first one. Despite the title, you know, we are going to take a look at a lot of the spin-offs here, but it all sort of started way back in the 1800s with the original Immortal game, the Immortal game. So I felt like we should at least very quickly go through the first one, see where all the hype came from, and see if it helps put these spin-offs into context. So to start with, we of course have Adolf Anderssen against Lionel, Adelbert, Gracie, and Felix Kaiseritsky. Okay, so Adolf has the white pieces, and in true, 19th century fashion, we're going to look at e4, e5, f4, e takes f4. What other romantic opening is so iconic as the King's Gambit accepted? So in this game, Anderssen plays bishop c4. Kaiseritsky decides to play the most combative queen to h4 check. Of course, this variation forcing white to move the king early on. And then we are going to immediately stray from modern chess theory with the move b5. And interestingly, in the Lichess database here, there is a game between Nigel Short and Garry Kasparov in rapid chess that also featured this move b5, but couldn't find too many other games here. So why b5, or why not b5? Well, it seems to sacrifice this pawn to get the bishop off this long open diagonal, but we'll see that perhaps the tempo-gaining threats that black is able to make are perhaps not so severe, and it just ends up not being the greatest of pawn sacrifices. Bishop takes b5 by white. Kaiseritsky plays knight to f6. Now knight f3 is immediately pushing this queen back. We see queen h6, and then Anderssen calmly, points out that the bishop is opposite the queen, and is hoping that this will result in some fun tactics. In the meantime, by the way, this is where Nigel Short decided to differ and chose knight c3 in this position, but nothing too crazy. So d3 by Anderssen. Now knight h5 by Kaiseritsky is immediately starting to create some threats, taking advantage of this queen back here on h6. And it turns out that despite being the immortal game, Anderssen did not play chess perfectly. Very few people did, ever, and especially in the 19th century, that would be a bit rare. So it turns out that the proper way, quote unquote, to deal with this would be to simply develop and ignore the threat. Just allow knight g3 check to happen and knight takes h1, because knight d5 is going to be such a strong move with counter threats against the black king. Or alternatively, just simply sidestepping with the rook. Rook to g1, and then despite the king being stuck on f1, it's actually not the least safe square in the world for the white king. In the game, though, Anderssen chooses knight to h4 to combat the threat. So now, of course, knight g3 can be met by pawn takes because the knight is interfering with the queen's access to the rook. Queen g5 played in the game, and now knight f5 is the follow-up for Anderssen, just planting the knight on a super strong square. And here is sort of black's last chance to, well, actually not the last chance to have an advantage. Black still plays pretty calmly and pretty reasonably with c6. But now we're going to see that this is where the whole idea of b5 is just a little bit flawed. By playing c6, you are, yes, threatening to capture this bishop on b5, but it turns out this threat isn't actually severe enough to warrant a full response by white. And that's what Anderssen sort of relies on here. So rather than move the bishop away, Anderssen offers it up as a sacrifice after g4, hitting the knight, knight f6, and simply rook g1, saying, okay, you can take my bishop if you want to. And Kaiseritsky says, yes, okay, I'll take your bishop. So what's wrong with that? What's wrong with taking the free bishop? Well, it turns out that this pawn is very, very important to keep control of the d5 square, and this is going to be a decisive factor in the actual game. So much better here for black was highlighting the point that this knight is a little bit stuck. Well, actually something like g6 it's a bit too late for. g6 could have perhaps been played instead of c6. But after this point, rather than capture, we need to solve the issues on the king's side. Of course, g6 is actually quite a bad move here because of h4. But h5 would be the trick, and then you can simply tuck the queen back away. And if any trades, black is doing perfectly fine in this position. And remember, white still owes a tempo over here. Eventually, black will be able to capture this bishop. Instead, though, we see c takes b5, now h4 hits the queen, we get queen g6, h5, queen back to g5, and now queen f3 makes a threat, and unfortunately now there's no turning back for black. We see knight g8 played by black, just no real comfortable way to save this queen, so we have to give it an escape route. We see bishop takes f4, queen f6, now knight c3, and it's pretty clear that this d5 square is the issue now for black. Bishop c5 played in the game, now knight d5 hitting the queen, queen takes b2, and then interestingly bishop d6, which leads to the immortal tactic that ends the game, but actually is perhaps not so good. It turns out that after queen takes a1, black is able to perhaps escape with a perpetual check here. At first glance, a computer will say that black is totally winning, but I think after king e2, it is most likely a draw. For example, just for some moves, queen to b2, king to d2 is actually an important nuance. Bishop takes on g1, and then e5, and somehow you end up in a draw here with threats on all sides of the board. For example, check, queen over, and I don't want to get bogged down in all of these complications because none of this happens in the game. Instead, we see bishop takes g1, and that is going to be the end of the game for black. Simply e5 now interferes with the queen's access to the king side. Queen takes a1, king e2, super safe in the middle of the board. By the way, take my rooks, anybody? Okay. Aside from that, knight a6, knight takes g7, king d8, and then if you haven't seen this tactic before, I would encourage you at home to try and find the checkmate here. Of course, the move is queen f6, and bishop e7 checkmate. And that's your immortal game. Everybody goes home happy. Anderssen's a champion. Just sacrifice all the pieces. Take my rooks, take my queen, checkmate. Easy, easy peasy. But there are a lot of games that sort of resemble this game somewhat, and as such have been named similarly. So I wanted to start with the two most closely related games I'm going to claim, which are the Immortal Losing game and the Immortal Drawing game. So these two games are going to share a lot of similarities to this classic Immortal game that we see here, but with their own twist on it in true spin-off fashion. So to start with, I want to take a look at this game between Bogdan Sliwa and David Bronstein. And I definitely didn't pronounce that one right, but that's okay. So we start with d4 and f5. So wildly different start than the previous game, obviously. Not going to be a king's gambit accepted. But then again, this is the Immortal Losing game, which is why we're looking at it from the loser's perspective. Okay, so g3, g6, bishop g2, bishop g7, and so far, so reasonably normal. It's just sort of a weird offbeat line in the Dutch, but nothing too crazy, right? Both sides getting developed, and white just choosing a rather non-aggressive fianchetto variation. Knight c3 played in the game, knight f6, bishop g5, and both sides just sort of casually complete development. The only real thing of note here is that black has neglected to move either center pawn for some time now. That being said, it's nothing, no great crime against chess just yet, but white should probably enjoy a slight advantage just because black is so vacant from the center. We see queen d2, and then black does play the move d6. In early h4 by Sliwa, a little bit ahead of his time here. This h4 move is really gaining in popularity in modern chess, but we do see it in some of the classics. And now e6 by Bronstein. So Bronstein is going for one of those hyper-flexible setups where he's not committing to e5 or d5 just yet, and really he can do anything with the pawn structure from this point forward. Queenside castles played by white in this case, and now h6 forces a decision from this bishop. It calmly retreats back to f4. We see bishop d7, and then white decides to break in the center with e4. And this is really the problem I'm going to claim with these super flexible, but perhaps lacking in space setups that Bronstein decided to go for here. The issue is just that white has a little bit too much freedom in the center of the board and is going to enjoy a little bit of an advantage because of it. Nothing too crazy though, as I keep saying. In the game we see fe4, knight e4, and knight d5. And like, yeah, white is slightly better, but nothing too bad. Knight e2 by white, finishing development. Queen e7 by black is a slightly strange move, just clearing the back rank, and again, keeping options open for the king. But now white does find a good move in the form of c4. And this sort of forces black's hand. Black really does need to sort of gain a tempo here by capturing on f4, because after the move played in the game, white actually has a really great move here to put the pressure onto black's position. So white to move, chat room, see if you can find a good move for Sliwa after Bronstein's knight to b6. See if you can find a good move for white after knight to b6. What do you think, chat? And yeah, there's actually two conflicting ideas, and it makes sense that these two ideas come to mind right away. Manny in the chat says c5, and Piman says d5, and now we have another vote for c5. So yeah, these are the moves that you should probably be looking at, and the reason for that is pretty simple. Black's king is stuck in the center, you have a lot of active pieces in the center, and a battery waiting to come down the d-file, so you should be looking for ways to open up the position with the pawns. And my cursor was just magically traveling. I don't know if you guys saw that. That was crazy. But okay, so c5 and d5 are definitely the moves that come to mind. You want to open things up in the center, and this is the way to do it. As for which move is correct, well, you do want to take advantage of this sort of dark square attack you've got going on, so definitely c5 is the move. And this is the move this is the reason why knight takes f4 was a bit better to avoid this sort of tragedy. Then knight takes would attack the g-pawn, and against c5 here, black would be able to shut things down with d5. And again, this is sort of the problem for Bronstein. You have this super flexible pawn structure, but you don't have any time to take advantage of the flexibility by moving it with d5 because your pieces are already under attack. So from here, white just is already a bit better. We see d takes c5 in the game, really the only option. But now bishop takes c7 is quite good. And at this point, Bronstein is already on the back foot. We see kingside castles, but white now chooses the simple bishop d6, just simply picking up the exchange. Queen f7, bishop f8, rook f8. And so, Bronstein's on the ropes, right? He's down, in exchange. He's losing all his center pawns. The opening has been a disaster. But now, he flips on the jets. He turns on the jets in the fourth quarter, and he's like, all right, I'm just going to checkmate the guy. I'm down material, just time to checkmate the guy. I'm going to play my immortal game. I'm going to sacrifice all my pieces, checkmate this guy. He never saw it coming. And so to start with this, we see white playing d takes c5, capturing the material, sort of playing the role of Kaiseritsky in the first immortal game, just taking. And now we see Bronstein playing knight d5. And what starts sort of as some position where black just looks entirely busted, we start to see pieces sort of gather around the queen's side, near white's slightly exposed king. In the game, Sliwa plays the move f4, which is a very good move. The point is to sort of stunt all this pressure down this f-file, as well as just gain more control over the dark squares in the center and the king side. Now we see Bronstein play rook to d8 again. Sort of saying, okay, all right, I'll start by cutting off this file from the white king. White king's not going to escape that way. And then after knight 2 to c3, we just see the swarm sort of begin. We see Bronstein play knight d to b4, saying, all right, I'm going to control some of these squares, going to control some of these squares, and now I'm going to control some of these squares. And it's starting to get a little bit scary if you're the player with the white pieces here. You may be up in exchange, and you may have a lot of control of the center, but black's pieces are starting to get really active. And if this is like a blitz game, then it's a little bit unclear if white's king is going to live to tell the tale of this game. That being said, white is doing great still, finds the great move knight to d6, and now queen to f8. And now, I want to see if you guys will survive the various traps that Bronstein has set in this game. So white plays the move knight takes b7, as I think many people naturally would. And then we see the move knight d4. And the threats are rising in the position. So, chat room, first question. Can you play the move knight takes d8 here? First question, can you play knight takes d8, or does something bad happen to you? Knight takes d8 or no? Your opponent just played knight d4, trying to corral your king. All right, the chat room is conflicted. Manny is pointing out a tactic involving knight takes a2 and knight b3. Something to look out for, to be sure. But Henry perhaps didn't see the tactic or saw past the tactic, because yes, knight takes d8 is in fact the correct move here, and it's what white ends up playing. The problem with knight takes a2 is that if knight takes a2, we do have knight b3 check, gaining back the queen at the very least, even if white does have a lot of pieces still. But just king b1 is going to be simple enough here. And then white is still doing just fine. So instead of, queen takes d8 like a, normal person, just sort of throwing in the towel, or knight takes a2 going for a tactic that doesn't work, Bronstein says, hey, that's fine. I didn't need that rook. I'm going to checkmate you with my minor pieces, and plays bishop b5. So chat, what's the move here? Bishop b5. Do you take this piece? Do you take something else? Do you defend your king? White to move here, chat room. Are you still navigating the traps? Are you still navigating the traps? So yeah, queen c5 on the previous move is like, it's just not enough, right? It's just not enough there. It doesn't really make a threat. Like knight takes a2, I guess, is the threat, but it doesn't do enough. So this time Henry says, don't take, it's a trap. And in this case, I think Henry's instincts are favoring him again. Knight takes b5 perhaps is a playable move, but you are very, very close to just being entirely busted after the incredible move, queen f5. And the point now is that this sort of subtle idea of knight takes a2 and knight b3 that we had earlier is now a checkmate threat rather than the threat to, just win a queen or something. So if knight back to c3, we actually just have knight takes a2 here and knight b3 with the checkmate, not just check. And so queen f5 would be a very nasty idea to have to deal with. That being said, all hope is not actually lost here for white. White actually does still have a path to save the king, but knight takes b5, a very clever trap set for Sliwa by Bronstein. Notably, the natural move, perhaps b3, just to try to give the king some space, get out of here, also doesn't really work because queen takes c5 is going to be quite strong. If king b1, simply knight takes b5, and the king is very much stuck on the b1 square here and is not going to be living to tell the tale, unfortunately. So, what move does save the game for white? What move does save the game? Does the chat room know this one? All right, I'm not going to wait too long, relying a little bit heavily on the chat here. But the incredible move, bishop d5, actually is one of the only two winning moves in the position, and this is the most unnatural one. So what is the point of bishop d5? Well, the point is you don't want to draw the queen away from our threat, because then white is able to capture on b4. And by the way, if white tried to capture on b4, of course, this is checkmate. So you don't want to move the queen away, because then your knight hangs. And you don't want to move the knight away, because then again, you are removing the threat of knight takes a2, and white can capture your other piece. And lastly, if pawn takes on d5, now b3 is playable, because there is this nasty interference where black can no longer take on c5 and no longer has this winning idea. And because of this incredible move, bishop d5, white is actually still winning. Now that being said, there is another option here, which is to play queen f2. And then after queen takes c5 and king d2, white again would be on the better side of things. Black can take this piece on b5. But white is up enough material here that after a move like bishop e4 or queen f1, just starting to take back some of the late squares, white is going to be winning once again. So, knight takes b5, perhaps a bit of a mistake putting yourself in hot water. So instead we see knight takes e6 by Sliwa, not falling for the trap. And now, bishop d3, an incredible move by Bronstein. What's the point of bishop d3? Well, it's the same idea as queen f5. We're gonna go knight takes a2 and knight b3 and dare you to stop me. So of course, knight takes queen would be a big blunder due to the checkmate. But of course, Sliwa, calm, cool, collected, just plays bishop d5. Says, I'm going to defend these light squares. You're not going to checkmate me. So Bronstein turns up the heat once again, plays queen f5, and is just entirely swarming the white king. But Sliwa finds another accurate move here. Knight takes d4. And now, after queen takes d5, of course, we're not going to see the move knight takes d5 when this is checkmate and 1. But instead, Sliwa just plays the simple knight c2. Pretty nice move here, just taking advantage of the pin of the bishop on the d file and ejecting this knight. And with this move, the attack is essentially over. Bishop takes c3 was tried, pointing out that queen takes is met by knight takes a2. And after pawn takes, we saw queen takes a2, c takes b4. And finally, out of pieces, David Bronstein decided to throw in the towel and resign here, down a full 2 rooks in this position. So this is the Immortal losing game, and it's been given this title because Bronstein had all the heart, all the tactical tricks of the Immortal game, but in this case, just lost all his pieces and lost the game, which is sort of what happened more so in the 20th century compared to the 19th century. Wait, the 20th century, 19th century. That's correct. 1800s and 1900s. Confused myself for a second. So we have the Immortal game where, white sacrificed all the pieces and won easily. We have the Immortal losing game where black sacrificed all the pieces and lost easily. Now, what is the Immortal drawing game? How do you have an Immortal drawing game? Well, it's pretty easy. One side sacrifices all their pieces, and then the players agree to a draw. So let's take a look at it. This one comes from Karl Hamppe and Philipp Meitner. 2 chess players, not really known for much else aside from this one game of chess that they played. But that being said, this one I think also happened in the 19th century, so if their names are still being tossed around today, clearly they did something right here. So let's take a look at this one. We have e4, e5, knight c3, bishop c5, and knight a4. What is white doing? Wasting time in the opening, attacking this bishop on c5. So, of course, how should black respond to knight a4 early on in the opening? What should black do? So, of course, black should play bishop back to e7. What are you, crazy? What did you think? Did you think I was going to say bishop takes f2? Bishop e7 is generally agreed to be the best move in this position. You just retreat the bishop, and you have yourself a normal game. Eventually, white's going to ask himself, why is my knight on a4? It attacked a bishop one time, but I guess I'm just going to move it back to c3 eventually. And everybody goes home happy. You play a normal chess game. But Philipp Meitner did, in fact, decide bishop takes f2 was the way to go. So now we have king takes f2, and of course the follow-up is queen to h4 check. And now we start to see that perhaps the sacrifice isn't as ridiculous as you might think, because if the move g3 were to be played, queen takes e4 actually causes white quite a bit of trouble here. For example, if bishop g2, a perfectly natural move, or even queen f3, then the knight's hanging, and this is a problem, right? So this move knight a4 actually actively working against white. And so if something like queen e2, queen e1, saying if you take my knight, then I'm going to take your pawn, then black can actually snap on the h1 square and be a bit better with extra material. So no turning back now for white. You've accepted the extra piece, You should play king e3. Defend your pawn. Your pawn's attacked. Your king's in check. Move the king, defend the pawn. What more is there to know? So the follow-up to this is, of course, queen to f4 check, and now king d3. So with the black pieces here, we'll actually flip to the black perspective because it's a bit more fun. With black, how do you continue? Right now, you're running a one-woman attack with your queen. You need more pieces. So where do you get the pieces out? The venerable game, 6-year-old versus 7-year-old. The incredible thing about this game is that, yes, there are some moves that are not ideal. The game was played in 1870, of course. But the players, their moves are actually logical. They make a lot of, intuitive sense, and they're not the worst moves on the board, 9 times out of 10. So wow, there's actually a lot of differing ideas here. b6 is a big one, knight f6, b5 has been said, and d5 has been said. So of those moves, you want to always play sort of the most ambitious, the most attacking, and that one is going to be d5 in this case. You want to still take advantage of this knight hanging loose on the a4 square. You want to open up your bishop, and you even want to just rip things open. Use the pawns to attack, use the pieces to attack, use everything you can to attack. So d5 is going to be the best option here. And the point of d5, of course, is that this move is sort of ridiculous. Black is just going to take the piece and be much better because your king's on d3. And there's no good way to defend this piece. If you play something like queen to f3, simply d takes e4. And if you take back, there's going to be a bishop f5 follow-up. So no good way to defend e4 here. So with that in mind, we got to run the king. And they're going to take on e4. You got to get out of there, dude. You got to get out of there. Queen takes e4 is coming. You can't just get checked, after queen takes e4. So king c3, best move, clearly. And now, queen takes e4 is played. Just inching forward with the black pieces. And by the way, maybe like in modern day chess, now we can cheat with computers, maybe like d4 is a slightly better idea for black to kind of maintain the balance here. I don't know, I didn't do the super in-depth study of this line, but queen takes e4 has been sort of the accepted move to keep the attack going. And now there's actually a fairly ridiculous move for white to just seize the advantage. King's on c3, knight's on a4, no pieces developed aside from that, but white can actually seize the advantage with the incredible move d4. Just much the same as how black played d5 to launch everything into the game, white should play d4 to get their own pieces activated. And the idea here is that after takes on d4, queen takes d4, there is this tactic with queen e1, but now white is happily going to sacrifice the rook on a1 in exchange for having all of white's pieces developed and suddenly none of black's pieces developed, and a largely safe queen. And the follow-up to this is going to be that queen takes g7 is coming very quickly and is not an easy idea to stop. For example, something like knight f6 is going to mean bishop b5 check and disaster. So you have to sort of deal with this, something like knight c6 or queen takes a2, but then queen takes g7. And white is going to be a bit better here. Queen a4, queen h8, and there's actually no way to save this knight. King f8 is always met by bishop h6, and it's a sad, sad story. So d4, incredible move for white. But of course, Karl Hamppe, he's good at chess, he's not that good at chess. Plays king b3, says, all right, I'm gonna keep running, dude. You keep chasing me, I'm gonna keep running. I gotta defend my knight, and my king is looking loose. So king to b3, that's the idea. And now, in order to stop d4, black should probably actually play something like d4 or knight c6 himself, just to prevent this idea, and continue the flow of the pieces. But instead in the game, we see knight to a6 instead. And this is where, this is probably the worst move of the game, to be honest. White definitely should play the move d4 here. Just play d4, get the pieces in the game, and get some defenders around your king. Instead, white tries the move a3. And the point of this move is pretty clear. White wants to run and hide. White's done. White's like, okay, I'm bailing, my king. It's been a fun journey, but I'm gonna hide on a2 now. Like that's the idea. So, chat room, unless you've seen this game before, if you've seen the game before, don't cheat. But black to move here. Black to move. How to continue? How to continue? What rating was this played in? Well, it's the 1800s, which I think predates pretty much any rating system, but these were, I think, two reasonably high-level chess players of the day. Now, it is the 1800s, so none of them are, competing with Magnus, but they are pretty good. All right, chat room's full of morons. What are you doing developing your pieces? What do you think this is? Do you think it's the Immortal game? Because there's no Immortal I developed my pieces game, okay? There's no Immortal I developed my pieces. Think bigger. Think bolder. D4, then bishop b6. So D4 is the move that Stockfish wants to play at depth 25. Which is terrible. White has an advantage. It's like plus 0.8. Stop trying to play like Stockfish. Play like a genius. Pyman says sack everything. And Colin is the first person I see with the correct answer. Whether or not, it was their original idea, I don't know. But, of course, now everybody sees it. Queen takes a4. Get rid of that knight on a4. That's been the whole point. We've been trying to take this knight. We've been inching closer. And now, finally, we get to capture the knight for free. So, of course, white plays king a2 and loses, or king takes a4, accepting the challenge. And now, the trick for black is to somehow keep this king from going backwards and still come up with checkmating threats. So the way to start is pretty clear. It has to be knight c5. If you do any other sort of check, the king can just come back to the hidey hole on a2. So knight c5 to start with. Now king b4. Now how should we follow? We got to keep the attack flowing. Got to keep the mate threats coming. How to continue? Well, of course, we should continue with the move, developing a piece. No, a5 check. Got to play boldly. Got to play the forcing moves here. And now the idea is that after king to c3, incredibly, I think black is actually winning in this variation, which is sort of ridiculous. The winning variation goes d4 check, king c4, bishop b6 check, king takes c5, and then incredibly, knight f6. And you're checkmated, buddy. You're checkmated. I don't know what to tell you. Got your king checkmated here. If you do nothing, something like queen f3, for example, you're going to get hit with knight to d7. This was the threat. And we've pretty effectively put this king in a box here. So king b5, only move. Now c6. And b5 check is actually not mate, but knight c5 is checkmate. Bishop does cover. So bishop b5 check is the better try. But then, incredibly, the winning move here, king e7. You just get out of the way. Just get out of the way, man. King e7, and black is winning. For example, queen f3, b6, and of course, the only winning move, rook a7. Why not? Rook a7, you got to defend the c-pawn and deliver checkmate to the king. Okay, but enough of this king c3 variation, okay? Who's playing king c3 here? This is the 1800s. This knight's hanging. It's not defended. Black's a moron. Free knight. Free knight. So, of course, priority number one for black is ensuring this king does not escape our mating net. So that means blocking off its access to the d5 square, which is why we see knight e7 played in the game. Now we do see bishop b5 check by white, desperately giving himself a defender. And of course, black to move here. The only move is king d8. That's right, the king's getting in on the action here. We need this king to defend this pawn in some lines. Otherwise, it's never going to work. It's just never going to work. So king d8, and of course bishop c6. Only move by white. Only move bishop c6. What happens if you don't play bishop c6? Well, I'll tell you what. You get checkmated. That's what happens. So also, for example, any other move like bishop a4, for example, is running into checkmate in this direction. Bishop e8, for example, is running into just capturing it and then the same threats. So bishop c6 is the only idea. Now, of course, we need to continue with b6 check. We're not going to get out of this game by playing b takes c6. It's surprisingly impossible to check this king on c5. This knight is 2 diagonal spaces away, which makes it really difficult to give a check. This bishop attacks on the light squares. We ran out of pawns. And it's pretty tough to get a rook over there as well. Pretty tough to get a rook. So that would be losing. So of course b6 check and king to b5. And now the final testing move, well, not one of the final moves that you have to find. Black to move here. Black to move and find the draw. Bishop c6, who invented these studies, these two players, they played the chess game. Bishop c6, only move by white. Only move. So bishop a6 check. The problem with bishop a6 is that you lost sight of your mating net, right? You're trying to put this king in a box, but the king is finding an escape route. Gotta be careful. Gotta be careful. Bishop a6, but how do you stop the king from running? How do you stop the king from running away? Okay, a4 has been suggested. I don't know off the top of my head what the problem with a4 is. The problem with a4 is that you're going to lose a rook. Rooks are powerful. We may have sacrificed a queen and half of our other pieces, but this rook is too much. We need this rook. So it's not quite as simple as a4, because after you lose this rook, this bishop is still going to be on the board, and one defender against this many attackers is just not a good combination there. You're not going to have enough. So Exquisite Corpse actually has the right idea. We need to play knight takes c6 here, surprisingly. And now the idea is that after king a4, we can actually cut the king off from the b3 square with the move knight to d4. And believe it or not, this is just forced checkmate. Bishop d7 is impossible to stop. The king is completely immobilized no matter what you play here. Bishop d7 and bishop b5. Just easy, easy win. Queen g4 is b5 check, by the way. So don't think you can stop it by being super clever. Probably you can actually just take this as well and come back. But anyways, enough of that. And the reason, by the way, why this doesn't work here is that, again, bishop takes a8 is too much, and you've lost your defender of the a5 square. On top of that, I think other moves like d3 are working, because you're just a turn too slow with your b5 idea. If you take this guy, I take this guy, and this is highly illegal. So knight takes c6, the only way. But then, I don't know if you guys realized, this knight's hanging. Knight's hanging. So, one more move to have to find here. One more move to find. What is it? What can you do? And yeah, Morozov already has the idea. Bishop b7 check. And this is our perpetual check draw repetition. King takes b7 is actually going to be winning for black after the idea king e7. No, not king e7. King d7. Cutting the king off and putting it in a big box with rook g8 coming. Now you might be thinking to yourself, wait a second, this move is check. But of course, king d6, no more checks. King is safe. This king's still in the box. No way to stop rook h to b8. And, you know, this one may not end up in Yasser Seirawan's Take My Rooks book, but it does end up in the Take All of My Other Pieces book. If this were to have happened, that's where it should go. In the book titled Take Literally All of My Pieces Besides My Rooks. But of course, this doesn't happen because white does not have to take on b7. That is one bishop too many to capture. You know, the white king may have captured every other piece, but that bishop, that's just one too many. So king b5 is played instead. And now without the bishop on c6, bishop a6 check is good enough. If king a4 were to be played, now bishop c4 and b5 are enough for checkmate. So king back to c6. And of course here, we need to stop the king from escaping out to d5. And bishop here is just a little bit too much because now we have no way to actually attack the king, and white's going to get the queen in the game and just sacrifice it the first chance that he gets, and that'll be the game. White would win. So we have to go back to b7, and now you're beginning to see the picture here, and the game is agreed to a draw. So that's the Immortal Draw, and those I think are sort of the big trifecta of Immortal games. You have the Immortal Win, you have the Immortal Losing game, and you have the Immortal Draw. But of course, there are tons and tons and tons of more Immortal games, and I did have one more that I wanted to show you here tonight. This is going to be the Immortal Zugzwang game. So you've seen the Immortal Win, the Immortal Loss, and the Immortal Draw, but now it is time to branch out away from chess results and into just chess concepts, because why not name every game an Immortal game? So this one is going to be between one Saemisch against Nimzowitsch, so two titans of the chess world in the early 20th century. And this is a game that actually gets featured in Nimzowicz's infamous or famous book, depending on who you ask, My System. But taking a look here, we start off fairly normally with Nimzowitsch having the black pieces. We get e6, knight f3, and a queen's Indian defense. White opts for a fianchetto. We see bishop b7, challenging this bishop before it ever arrives. Bishop e7, knight c3, castles, castles, and d5. So far, so reasonably normal again. I think a main move here is knight e4, but d5, perfectly acceptable move, right? Just challenging the center. Normal stuff. White opts for the move knight e5 here, which is fairly common. You'll see this in a lot of queen's pawn openings. White just occupies the e5 square early on because white has time to do so by virtue of having the extra first move. Now black plays the move c6, which is not really the most common. Generally, blocking this bishop off from this diagonal this early is not ideal. A huge point to this opening is that black gets good control over the e4 square, and with c6, that sort of abandons that concept, and white can usually get a pretty solid advantage by taking over the e4 square here. And there's a ton of lines that you can analyze at your leisure after e4, but white should be a bit better. In this game, though, Saemisch plays much more simply with c takes d5 and c takes d5. Now, this has the effect of closing this diagonal forever and making this bishop look a little bit silly on b7, but it also has the effect of, giving back control over e4 to black. And so this really shouldn't be giving black any problems. Bishop f4 is played in the game, and Nimzowitsch just starts to expand a little bit with a6, intending the simple b5. Rook c1 played in the game, now b5 to follow, and just gaining some space on the queen side of the board. We see queen b3, and now knight c6 by Nimzowitsch. And Saemisch now plays a move that sort of readily admits that the opening has not necessarily gone his way. So this last move, queen b3, I think is actually a pretty bad one, because knight c6 now faces you with this awkward decision of what to do with the pawn on d4, and it also might make you realize that knight a5 and knight c4 are sort of coming. So white plays the move knight takes c6, and this is really never a move white should be happy with in these kinds of openings, because you can just sort of count the moves each side has made. White has made 1, 2, 3 moves to trade these knights. Black has made 1, 2, and you basically just lose a tempo and activate this bishop for black. That is all that you really achieve by taking on c6. And this is an idea that actually shows up in many different positions, where if you're the side moving your piece all around, maneuvering it across the board, and then you initiate a trade, you're usually not the happiest about it. So black completely equalizing here. We see h3 by white, just a sort of waiting move, but in this case it doesn't help all that much and might end up hurting the position, as we'll see. Queen d7, and white continues to play very, very slowly with king to h2. As for a slightly more active idea, perhaps white should be rerouting this other knight over to the e5 square, just to sort of do something, because at the moment, white is really doing nothing. We see king h2 in the game, and now Nimzowitsch opts for knight to h5, hitting this bishop on f4. White retreats the bishop back to d2, and this is sort of going to be the character of the game now. So this is a really instructive idea that I want to highlight from this game, because obviously these games are immortal because they're really, really fun to look at, but I do think that this idea of the knight on h5 is one to take note of. Especially for your own games, right? The last few games, sort of so crazy, there's not too much to take home as far as lessons. But in this game, knight h5, this is going to really influence the rest of the play in the game. At reasonably high levels of chess, having a knight sidelined, having any piece sort of out of play for a prolonged period of time is pretty bad. It's sort of game losing. I think last week I analyzed a game where a knight was stuck on a4, and that was essentially what lost the game for that player. In this case, it's going to be a battle of deciding whether or not this knight on the rim is actually dim or grim or whatever have you, or if it can be a really nice attacking piece. So we're going to see Nimzowitsch trying to prove that the knight on h5 is useful, and White's Saemisch, on the other hand, should be looking to prove that this knight is sidelined and is not useful. And if it looks like it's going to be useful, White should drive it away. So in the game, we see Black immediately playing the move f5. And this is in direct relation to having this knight on h5. Yes, perhaps some days Nimzo is thinking about bringing this knight to the e4 square, but even more importantly, it's looking to sort of team up with this knight on h5 by playing f5, f4, launching an attack on these dark squares that the knight is pressuring. And this, by the way, is perhaps another reason why h3 is a bit ill-advised. Now, again, White should probably be starting to reroute this knight and slow down some of this pressure on the queen side. But instead, we see queen back to d1. And I think this is just a really poor game positionally by Saemisch so far. Like h3, king h2, queen b3, queen d1, knight f3, knight e5, knight takes c6, just not leaving the best impression. Nimzo continues now with b4, forcing the knight back to b1. And while, a while ago, I was talking about this maneuver being something active for White to try to do, at this point, it's a bit too late. A bit too much time has been lost. Bishop b5 now for Black, and we see that by taking on d5 so many moves earlier, White has locked in his own bishop, and Black has found a way to activate using this extra space on the queen side. Rook g1 now by Saemisch unpinning. We see bishop d6, and Black is essentially saying, I'm going to play f4 on the next turn and rip open your king side, and you're going to be totally busted. So Saemisch, not one to roll over quietly, finds the really active idea of e4. And the point here is that Saemisch is finally saying, hey, I don't like this knight on h5. I'm going to attack it. Not only am I going to attack it, but I'm going to use this tempo to sort of rip open the center. So Black to move here. What do you think Nimzowitsch played, chat room? What should Nimzowitsch do here? What should Nimzowitsch do? And then Great Wolf has a question from earlier, which I will actually circle back to, if I remember. About half the time when I say that, I forget, which is always nasty. So nobody has the answer. Knight takes g3 is reasonable, but actually not the best way to sacrifice the knight. f4, again, I guess reasonable, trying to give up the knight for this pawn on g3, but still not the best way to sacrifice the knight. Nimzowitsch finds the best way, which is with f takes e4. And the point now is that you get this pawn in the center, you get control over a ton of these squares, and you also actually still get to break down these dark squares thanks to rook takes f2, all in exchange for the knight. Knight g3 only really manages to take off this pawn, and after e5, you might find yourself regretting this idea. As far as f4, I think here, this is just not as much. This pawn on e4 still lives, and you're not getting any material, actually, for the piece, so that's a bit worse. So f takes e4, the best way to do it, with rook takes f2 to follow. But yeah, you guys are correct in thinking you have to sacrifice this knight. Like, knight f6 is just, like, so sad, and e5 is a problem anyways. So, f takes e4, queen takes h5, rook takes f2, and now queen g5 by White, just trying to defend here and bring the queen back into the play. Of course, rook a to f8, just bringing in more pieces. And king h1, which is not a move I fully understand by Saemisch here. I think Saemisch is just trying to stop rook 8 to f3, making use of this pin. So king h1 unpinning, trying to defend this square. But now rook 8 to f5 hits the queen. And bishop d3, which just really locks White into this awful, awful position. Now, rook c to e1 played in the game. And black to move here, everybody. Black to move. See if the chat room can find the winning move in this position. Black to move and win the game. Great Wolf says king h8, and he's close. He's close, but that's not the move that black decided to play. There's actually one more useful move that black can play. And yeah, everybody has it. Everybody has it. So the last useful move for black is h6. And the point now, of course, this is the Immortal Zugzwang game, and so you should have all been looking out for the position where white's in Zugzwang. And this is it. White is totally and entirely zugged in this position. There is no way to improve the position, and in fact, most of white's moves here lose the game on the spot. White can try and pass for maybe a turn or two with something like a3. Black can actually just shore up the pawn with a5 and maintain the position. For example, takes, and once again, it is going to be white's turn. White can pass again with something like b3, I believe, but king h8. And now it is once again going to be white's turn. You can even play something like h4, but once again, simply king g8 is good enough. And the point, to circle back to this position, is that yes, white can sort of try and pass with the pawn moves, but eventually those are going to run out. Black can do something even as simple as move the king back and forth, and any piece move, literally any piece move, is going to be disastrous for white. So let's sort of go through them one by one. Why not king h2? Passing, trying to hold the position. Well, the problem with that is it steps back into this pin that we talked about earlier, and rook 5 to f3 is now going to be winning the game. The queen is entirely trapped, and you have to just sacrifice it for a rook. And then you're kind of zugged again, almost. Not entirely, but almost. So king h2 is out. Same thing with g4 here. If you play g4, rook 5 to f3. The bishop can no longer take, because this is checkmate with the bishop. Why not bishop c1? Well, that hangs the knight on b1. Why not rook c1? Well, that hangs rook e2, when again, the queen is entirely trapped. Why not anything to f1? Well, this is just hanging a piece. And why not h4 and bishop h3? Well, once again, that is going to hang the queen, leaving it totally trapped. Why not any knight move? Well, there are no knight moves. Rook d1 also loses to rook e2, and that's that. There's no more moves. White is in Zugzwang. So this is the Immortal Zug position, where just despite having all but one minor piece on the board, white is entirely strapped for moves and just cannot do anything. Just cannot do anything. Forced to resign, and Saemisch does in fact resign after the move h6. So this is the Immortal Zug. So far we've covered the Immortal game, the original one, the Immortal losing game by Bronstein, where Bronstein sacks all the pieces and loses in great fashion. We have the Immortal Draw by Karl Hamppe and Philipp Meitner. And now we have the Immortal Zug by Saemisch and Nimzowitsch. So I do want to go back into this game. Great Wolf had a good question earlier on. After knight takes on c6, bishop c6, there is this nice little discovered attack idea, and white can sort of try to make use of it with something like knight e4. Knight a4 actually doesn't work because this is a tempo, but knight e4 is playable. But once again, black is going to be doing totally fine here. White has some activity, but black's going to get an extra pawn. So just for those curious about this little tempo here after knight takes c6, that's what was going on. And aside from that, there are actually some moments here when white should be able to sort of save the game a little bit. This knight h5 and f5 idea by Nimzowitsch actually perhaps isn't the best. Perhaps a bit better was just to immediately start launching this stuff on the queen side, just advancing these pawns and taking a bunch of extra space. After f5, white should in fact be looking to evict this knight. Something like bishop f3 is perfectly fine here, followed up with bishop f4, and white is at least fighting back in the center of the board. And so that's really where Saemisch goes wrong. Like, even after h3 and king h2, white is wasting a ton of time, but isn't entirely lost just yet. It's just the fact, like, the queen d1, knight b1, you know, these kinds of moves. All these retreating moves, rook g1, and then following this up with e4 is just asking a bit much. You can't play 6-0 moves in a row and then say, I'm going to play the glorious e4 and free my position. It's just asking too much of the position, as many famous commentators often say. So, any final questions for me before we call it a day here? Any final questions? After rook f3, why not queen takes rook f3, winning both rooks? So, okay, I will quickly just go over this final tactic at the end. Anytime I was playing rook f3, it was with the pin here. So we don't play rook f3, but pawn takes f3, and you only get one of the rooks. Same thing after g4. If you take here, I just take with the pawn. And once again, this is the pin. But okay. Marshall Lasker 1925 was like another Immortal losing game, but this one was the official one. I looked it up. It's got a Wikipedia page. That's how you know. That's how you know it's official. All right. So maybe if you guys enjoyed this one, I will do a follow-up series with more Immortal games. There are plenty to choose from. These I found the most interesting because they were the ones not named after just like a location or a player, instead named after just chess results and eventually a chess concept with Zugzwang. But if you guys have any secret spin-off Immortal games that you don't think I know about, feel free to leave a comment and maybe I will go over some more Immortal chess games in the coming Road to 2000s. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this first ever Tuesday edition of the Road to 2000. Once again, there have been some schedule changes. I will always be on Tuesday nights now. Please check our website for the full details on that. And aside from that, as always, my name is Caleb Denby. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye.